Russia has tested a new nuclear-capable missile.
Long-range missile strikes into pre-2014 Russia are a red line for them. That red line was crossed. Russian claims about military technology capabilities should be taken seriously. I'll go with what NATO calls this missile the Skyfall, and that was only the second scariest thing that the Russians released in the span of a week.
I'm very pleased to welcome back to the show Doomberg. He's the head writer of the collective known as Doomberg. Check him out on Substack. A lot of very interesting news and commentary surrounding the energy markets and geopolitics, both of which we'll be discussing today. Welcome back to the show, Doomberg. Good to see you.
David, always a pleasure.
I want to start by talking about what's been happening in Russia. You've been talking about this and writing about this on Substack. Russia has tested a new nuclear-capable missile, says Putin and top general. Moscow tested a new nuclear-capable and powered cruise missile fit to confound existing defenses, inching closer to deploying it to its military, said President Vladimir Putin. The announcement, which followed years of tests of the Burevestnik, I'm not saying that correctly, but perhaps you'll correct me. Burevestnik missile comes as part of a nuclear messaging from the Kremlin, which has resisted Western pressure for a ceasefire in Ukraine and strongly warned the U.S. and other NATO allies against sanctioning strikes deep inside Russia. Okay, a couple of things here. We're going to talk about whether or not its claims are true, that it can actually possibly evade Western air defenses, and number two, what the U.S. response has been and will be.
Yeah, great question. So one of the great challenges of Western propaganda is they generally ignore what Russia is saying and doing and or mischaracterize it. Russia has been warning the U.S. specifically and Britain also, and the rest of NATO, that long-range missile strikes into pre-2014 Russia are a red line for them. That red line was crossed by Biden in November, but the Russians held back because of Trump having won the election and proclaiming that he was going to engage in a new approach with Russia, which to his credit he tried to do, however haphazardly. And all this talk about Tomahawk missiles going to Ukraine, the entire reason that Russia claims it went to war in Ukraine is to prevent such things from happening. And so the talk about Tomahawks triggered Putin to release this information publicly. From here, of course, we can't know what's true, what's not true. Generally speaking, Russian claims about military technology capabilities should be taken seriously. And we think at face value, at least from a game theory perspective. This missile has been known to Western intelligence for a long time, and I won't correct your pronunciation because I'm particularly bad at it myself. I'll go with what NATO calls this missile the Skyfall. It's actually the SSC X9 Skyfall, and it's nuclear propulsion capable of both conventional and nuclear warheads. And that was only the second scariest thing that the Russians released in the span of a week, which I'm sure we'll talk about here next.
What is the U.S. response at this point on?
Yeah, Trump went to Truth Social and said that the U.S. would start or restart nuclear testing. The Russians have interpreted this as actually, exploding nuclear material in the old way that it used to be done. The U.S. has not actively tested a nuclear weapon since 1992. We don't think actually Trump meant that. It's always dangerous to post significant foreign policy decisions on Truth Social, we think, especially those around nuclear war. What Trump was probably alluding to is the U.S. will pick up its game in testing nuclear-capable missiles and submarines and torpedoes itself in response to what Russia is doing. This all comes against the backdrop, David, of the New START treaty is going to expire in February, and there's no plan or setup of negotiations to extend that treaty. That's basically go time for a revival of nuclear arms race, and we're going to see a nuclear arms race between the U.S., Russia, and China going forward. Undoubtedly, Putin has offered Trump a one-year extension of the New START treaty, which would give both sides time to negotiate a new one. That offer has not yet been responded to, at least not publicly, that we can find. And so the U.S. response is tit for tat arms race, which should scare everybody.
There are challenges to Russia's claims, and I'll just show you one such article here by this particular article, "We Are the Mighty." I mean, this is, this is a web page that obviously is pro-American, but it claims that this is the world's dumbest weapon. This is your regular reminder that Russia can't afford any of its super weapons. And second, the weapons are often pretty dumb anyway. Of course, if true, we are now facing a global crisis. A Russian nuclear-powered cruise missile threatens all human and even multicellular life on Earth. Well, yes, that is what a nuclear weapon does. It doesn't matter who holds the keys. But I'll let you evaluate whether or not this technology, the claim that Russia doesn't have the economy to even afford super weapons in the first place, should we even be worried?
That's just an absurd statement. Russia has already the world's largest and most sophisticated nuclear arsenal. It is an extremely sophisticated country. We call this sort of Western techno-arrogance. Russia is nothing but a gasoline station masquerading as a country. And anybody who's interacted with Russia, Russian companies, Russian scientists knows that this is puff propaganda of the worst kind. I don't know where it states in proper game theory that you should perpetually underestimate your foes. And that would seem to be, of all the questions to not underestimate your foes on, this would seem to be one. If North Korea can develop nuclear weapons, surely Russia can develop better ones. And the scientific, cultural strengths of Russia are real, undeniable. I mean, many people deny them, but it doesn't make them less real. And again, we just think it does the West no good to underestimate Russia, to underestimate China. China has leapfrogged the U.S. in technology. It's just plain as day. Anybody who visits China and goes to their manufacturing facilities sees what's going on. If Russia couldn't afford to develop these weapons, NATO would be doing a lot better on the battlefield than it currently is.
This is President Trump responding to the Russian missile testing.
Literally resuming underground nuclear detonation tests.
You'll find out very soon, but we're going to do some testing yet. Other countries do it. If they're going to do it, we're going to do it.
Okay, you can't clarify whether you'll resume.
I'm not going to say yet. I mean, I know exactly what we're doing, where we're doing it, but other countries are doing it, and if other countries do it.
Other countries are doing it, and if other countries do it, we're going to do it too. Is this the beginning of a new arms race, and if so, what impacts could that have on the energy markets?
Yeah, I mean, well, a new arms race that ends in nuclear Armageddon, I mean, who cares what happens to the energy markets, right? But I think it is, David. I think this is a very serious issue. The nuclear arms treaties were negotiated very carefully over decades, and I don't think it's wise to just toss them away. This is a worldwide issue. It's not just an issue for the U.S. or for Russia or for China to decide, in our view. Of course, we're strongly anti-war. We wish there were no nuclear weapons. One of the worst, most dastardly inventions ever made. And here we are. It's scary. And I don't think it gets enough coverage in the West. This is all over the news in Russia. I suspect few people listening to this podcast knew that New START treaty was going to expire in February and what that meant, whereas it's wall-to-wall coverage in Russia. Again, it blows my mind that we're here. And, I remember growing up, I'm sure as you did, doing the drills, getting under your desk in elementary school. And, we took this stuff much more seriously back in the day than we seem to be taking it now.
Before we continue with the video, let's talk about a growing issue, a very important issue, online privacy. Your personal data isn't just sitting in your email or phone. It's being scraped, sold, and passed around by data broker sites every single day, and you may not even know it. Today's sponsor, Delete Me, helps you fight back. They monitor hundreds of broker sites, scan for your exposed personal data, and remove it before it can be used against you. You'll also get regular privacy reports that show where your data was found and what's been taken down. In fact, in one recent check, they reviewed over 340 plus listings to see if any data broker had my personal information on my report. That's how much is out there, and they keep scanning every single week. Don't wait. Go to joindeleteme.com/DavidLin and use the code DavidLin for 20% off of all U.S. plans, or scan the QR code here on the screen right now. Take control of your privacy before somebody else does. moving on now, we have to talk about the broader war in Ukraine overall, and it's been almost a year since Trump was in power. Took office. Inauguration was in January, and it doesn't seem like we're getting any closer to some sort of deal, peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And in fact, just today I was reading that the FBI apparently is now investigating Zelensky and his allies regarding corruption using U.S. money. So we're getting further away from a deal, if not anything. So can you comment on this progress, or maybe significant, or maybe a lack of progress?
You hit the nail on the head in one way that is not really commented upon too much in the Western media. Look, let's start at the beginning. Full credit to Trump. We happen to agree that if Trump were president, this war would not have started. And he says that routinely, and he is right to say that. He came into office hopeful that he could stop the war. I think he underestimated the seriousness of the war from the Russian perspective and the willingness from the Ukrainian side to cede an inch to the Russians. And so it's not just that Russia is refusing to come to the table, it's that Ukraine won't accept any concessions at all. And they can argue, and they do, and their supporters argue that, Russia invaded Ukraine, and this is Ukrainian sovereignty, and what part of the U.S. would you give up, and all that stuff, and that's all fine. Wars are won and lost, right? And so if you think you can go and conquer your territory without Western money and without Western weapons, because the appetite to give more money and the inventory of weapons to give to Ukraine just aren't there, there's not much you can do. Trump himself said it on Air Force One. It looks like they just need to fight it out. And I do believe, we've been saying for a long time, that this war will end militarily. Peace will be imposed by military force, unless there's a revolution in either of the two countries, which doesn't seem to be on the cards, at least certainly not in Russia, that this war will end at the end of a barrel. And that's a terrible way for wars to end. Not all wars end in stalemates, that's for sure. So we'll see. The two sides are way too far apart. Just listen to Zelensky. So like Zelensky's peace proposal is a freeze, and then put Putin on trial for war crimes and make Russia pay restitution, and eventually give all the land back. And Russia's just never going to do that. And Putin says, these are our objectives. The root causes of the war in the first place need to be addressed, and the main country that can address those root causes is actually the U.S., not Ukraine.
Well, it looks like the Democrats have introduced a bill that blocks Trump from unilaterally starting nuclear weapons tests. So we'll see how this progresses. But meanwhile, it looks like China, this might be a bigger distraction from the bigger picture, which is potentially that the U.S. is falling behind China in the matters of energy production. So some recent news here, China achieves thorium uranium nuclear fuel conversion. So thorium molten salt reactor TMSR, and obtained valid experimental data following thorium fuel loading. Meanwhile, Trump has he's presented a few legislations that would make it easier for uranium mining to be done in the U.S. And I think you and I talked about this. The Trump administration does have a broader agenda to widen nuclear production and nuclear facilities in the U.S. But how far behind is the West when compared to China? Doomberg.
So I'm of two minds with this headline, and I can assure you that it has been sent to us dozens and dozens of times. If you're listening, you don't need to send us that article. We've read it.
Yes.
The China is ahead of the U.S., strictly speaking, in both the sort of deployment of nuclear reactors as measured by speed and cost, and the nuclear science capability of its broader community, I think, is pretty good. But this particular headline and the hype cycle that came with it is not game-changing in our view. Technology is not rate limiting for the deployment of nuclear power. Just take the AP1000 and do it 100 times and we'll be done. And that's what I think Trump is trying to do. We wrote a piece on this, of course. The thorium stuff is it's on the same sort of spectrum as fusion. A lot of people get excited about it, but the The technology solves fake problems. There's an infinite supply of uranium, and there's no real reactor meltdown risk with the latest designs. All that needs to happen is the best designs get implemented over and over and over again, and the problem is solved. The technology is not rate limiting to the deployment of sustainable, abundant nuclear energy.
But it's not a game changer in the sense that the technology already exists, or it doesn't really, it doesn't take us in the right direction at the speed at which it promises to do. I mean, I've read apparently that it's modular, it's portable, and the U.S. has not fully tested it yet. So we'll get your take.
I mean, again, there's enough great designs out there.
Yes.
That what's not needed is a better design with better attributes. Again,
yes,
the CANDU reactors, the AP1000, the Russian reactors, the Korean reactors, these are all perfectly fine, buildable, runnable, safe, cheap when done correctly solutions to the energy dilemma. And so if you need, let's say, to put numbers on it, if you need a score of 50, and there's 10 reactor designs that give you a score of 100, do you get excited about a score of 105? No, because all you need is a score of 50 and you're good to go.
If you were head of the energy department in the U.S. and you were tasked to expand the output of the energy supply by, 2-3x, magnitudes greater than whatever we have now in the next 10 years, and you had to do this in a way that isn't going to bankrupt the U.S. and destroy the environment completely, what would your game plan be?
Natural gas and nuclear, in that order, and that's kind of what's happening. I would also make it wildly easier to build and permit off-grid power plants to directly power data centers, which is the driving need to your question, of course. Directly power data centers with natural gas. There are some constraints. Those constraints will eventually get wiped away. There's currently a shortage of gas turbines, which we recently wrote about in a piece called Tlaib's Law. But these things will get solved. The fuel that I would use is nuclear and natural gas because natural gas is the cleanest burning, cheapest hydrocarbon on the board, and it's in huge overabundant supply in the U.S. in particular, and then of course nuclear for the reasons we talked about. And on that front, existing Secretary of Energy Chris Wright is taking the correct approach. Pick a reactor design and go with it. And the deal that was cut between the Japanese and the U.S. Was a good one. And let's get those AP1000 reactors cranking.
Well, what can we do to lower the cost of energy production or electricity overall in the U.S.? As you are aware, different jurisdictions have different costs. I mean, some of this could be quite varied across the nation. I've just been informed that Texas, for example, is not just a fuel powerhouse, but it also accounts for a big chunk of the electricity production in the U.S. using renewables. In the first half of 2025, Texas led the nation in renewable energy production. California was actually second. And it's also got a very competitive retail electricity market. It seems, and this is just a correlation here, maybe not a causation, but it seems that jurisdictions with low energy costs usually also operate a lot of renewable energy production on the grid. Can you explain this?
Lower or higher? Our correlation is the more renewables on a grid, the higher the cost of electricity.
Okay, well that's interesting because,
Texas has a huge amount of renewables and California has a huge, look, when renewables swamp dispatchable power, then things begin to break, and we see that everywhere. This is why Germany has expensive electricity. Look, my plan to decrease costs of electricity is to stop loading intermittent renewables onto pre-existing grids, greatly expand natural gas, which is both baseload and dispatchable, and build out nuclear power in that order. California's got the most renewables in the country, and it has actually the most expensive electricity in the country, last I checked. There are times where electricity prices plummet in California because there's too much solar, and during those times they export to their neighbors at rock bottom prices, and then when solar doesn't show up, they have to buy from their neighbors at elevated prices. And in fact, if California was not integrated into its neighbors' grids, it would have collapsed. Their grid would have collapsed a long time ago. The costs are driven by a combination of increased intermittency when that becomes a greater share of production, then dispatchability, which is basically nuclear and hydro, then you get real challenges keeping the lights on. And then making things worse, of course, is the demand for data centers and the plugging those into the grid.
Based on your research, what are the biggest misconceptions and commonly misunderstood notions about renewable energy that you've encountered?
Sure. First of all, hey, the fuel is free, so it has to be cheap. Nuclear fuel is practically free too, and you wouldn't argue that a nuclear plant is free. There's a sleight of hand between the perceived cost of the fuel and the cost to actually use it on a modern grid. That's a big one. Another big sleight of hand is capacity while ignoring capacity factors. Oh, 2 gigawatts of solar, 2 gigawatts of nuclear. Of course, nuclear has a 90% capacity factor, operates 90% of the time, and solar has a 25% capacity factor in the sunny parts of the country. And so 2 gigawatts of solar is not, in fact, 2 gigawatts of nuclear. And then other big one, I think, is that the cost to integrate into the grid and to make the grid stable with so much intermittent inverter-based resources, those extra costs that somebody has to pay are regularly ignored when trying to measure the cost of solar in isolation with fraudulent measurements like levelized cost of electricity and so on. And so the fuel being free is probably the biggest one. Once you install enough wind and solar, the fuel is free and we'll have this low price nirvana. That's just frankly a lie.
And how much electricity or energy do data centers actually need over the coming years? So here we have an article from the FT, and I'll just share with you a few stats presented in some findings. In 2024, the U.S. Department of Energy forecast that the data centers will consume 6.7 to 12% of U.S. electricity by 2028. I don't know if they've updated those forecasts. It was done last year, up from 4.4% in the 2023 forecast. Have you looked into this yourself, and roughly how much electricity will data centers need?
Yeah, when we looked at it, we wrote a piece last year, actually, sort of forecasting this called irreconcilable differences, where we concluded that the projections in growth were just incompatible with prices that residential and traditional industrial customers have been paying historically, and that this would all have to go offline. That's why we think the gas going in, data coming out, and no interactions with the grid, or maybe one connection to the grid for backup power or for extra power that feeds the grid. But by and large, these things, we just can't make room for them on modern grids and have a grid that is usable for the rest of us. And so it's going to have to be moved off grid in our view.
The renaissance of gas is being driven by a hunger for electricity from the data centers that are powering the boom in AI. You see the boom in AI reflected in the tech stocks, which is driving up the entire stock market, or has been in the last year and a half. You don't really see this so-called quote unquote hunger for electricity being reflected in the energy price now, is it? Isn't that a little strange?
Well, there's like different prices, right? There's just so much natural gas.
Sure.
That, the reason why everyone's excited is because the U.S. is swimming in gas and would like to get rid of it, which is why it's building out a wave of LNG export facilities. But then electricity bills are a whole different issue, right? That's the bill that you and I pay and big, heavy industry customers pay. Those prices are, in fact, going up significantly in the areas where there's either a lot of renewables or a lot of data centers or both. And so this is a real problem. This is why we titled the piece "Irreconcilable Differences." This can't go on for much longer at this rate of growth, especially given all of the challenges with permitting and transmission lines and transformer shortages and all the things that are real and are out there as constraints for this. And so we just don't think it can go on, and that which can't go on usually doesn't.
Any risks of the U.S. obtaining Venezuelan oil in some form or other, either through trade or some radical claims have been noting that maybe the U.S. could invade Venezuela? I don't know if that's even in the realm of possibility, but it's certainly popping up in energy headlines. What do you think?
Yeah, first piece we wrote when Trump was president, actually published. Bless you.
Sorry,
published
thank
it.
you.
That's all right. The first piece we wrote on Trump's inauguration day was called "Misreading the Room," And I believe the social media preview for that piece was if Greenland was the appetizer, might Venezuela be the main course? And this is one of the most predictable things of 2025, the Armada now assembling off the coast of Venezuela. We don't know how this resolves. Usually when the U.S. assembles that large of a military fleet, the bombs start flying. It sure seems like a tough country to invade and occupy. If the mission is regime change and access to oil, that could probably be done a little more quickly. None of this, of course, is legal, but laws seem to apply quite selectively in geopolitics these days. And so,
Well,
go ahead.
yes. No, please continue.
Yeah, I mean, the cover story is drug cartels and narcotics trade, but the real issue, of course, as you and I know, is Venezuela sitting on the largest hydrocarbon resource base in the world, and its particular grades of heavy crude happen to be precisely the types of grades that Gulf Coast refiners like to refine. And they used to produce 4 million barrels a day, and now they produce 1, and they should probably be producing 5. And 4 million barrels a day is an awful lot of cheese for the oil super majors, and so it's a prize that's too tempting to ignore.
Well, if oil drops much lower than if the oil price actually goes below its the break-even cost for a country like Venezuela, then what geopolitical implications would that have?
I don't think these types of decisions aren't made over the short term. Oil prices go up and oil prices go down, but having the resource is always a part of U.S. geopolitical strategy. You know, they're unfortunately quite cynical ways to look at the world, but it's just a mental model that works. And so, you know, when we write about the Western Hemisphere, we wrote a piece called Mosaic Theory a couple of months ago that predicted that Argentina would get bailed out, and that there'd be some stresses with Colombia, and that Venezuela was on the menu. And these things are all driven by, oil and gas, and they just are.
Okay, well, let's finish off on oil itself. This is the chart of the WTI, and you've been cautious on the growth of the oil price for quite some time. In fact, before Trump's inauguration, you told me that a Trump win would be just outright bearish for oil. More or less, you've been correct, as the oil price this year has not performed well. Anything on the horizon that could point to you that we're at an inflection point right now, Doomberg, or is the trajectory still more pressure downwards?
More pressure downwards. There's no bullish catalyst on the horizon that we see. There's just so much of it, David. And the fact that there's so much natural gas is also an issue. And if natural gas becomes expensive in the U.S., that's going to put real pressure downward on oil price, because natural gas and oil are co-produced in major parts of the U.S. today. So if natural gas went to $7 a million BTU in the Permian Basin, they'd be giving away oil to get the natural gas. There's no longer a break-even price of oil in the Permian Basin. You have to look at both oil and gas because they're produced together. And co-producer economics can be difficult for those who don't have experience with them to understand. But if the AI boom drives demand for gas, which puts a bid under gas, and you're drilling for gas and you get oil too, you'll give away the oil if the price of gas is high enough. That's what we're seeing on the flip side today. Natural gas is negative in the spot market in the Permian because oil is still relatively expensive compared to fundamentals. And so, nothing about owning commodities or commodity producers that gets us too exciting. Look, the long-term real price of all commodities is lower. Yeah, this is Henry Hub. This is not the Permian. You want to look at the Waha Hub, WAHA Hub, but doesn't matter. At $4 a million BTU, that's $25 a barrel oil. Sorry, that's the oil equivalent price of $25 a barrel. And in the Permian, it's trading for negative spot, maybe $2 on a 12-month strip. And $2 is what, $12 a barrel oil. And so if you saw that, the break-even price for gas-only producers, say in Appalachia, is like $2 and change a million BTU. You put gas at 6 or 7, I mean, there's just going to be a stampede of drilling for gas. And what would we do with all the extra oil? They would dump it at any price. And look, in the Western Hemisphere, there's 10 million barrels a day of incremental oil that could be produced there. If you go bottom up, Argentina with Vaca Muerta, Mexico, Venezuela, Guyana, Colombia, Brazil. There's just so much oil in the world. People know how to get it. And that ultimately, we're still relatively bearish. And as you saw on that chart, like we were saying this at $75, and here we are, at 59 and change.
And I'll just finish off here. At least based on your projections, we're not going to have higher energy costs to weigh in on the CPI. Here is the CPI index. At least energy costs are going to bring up the CPI index overall. Energy is a big component of the CPI, and it's been hovering around 0.
Yeah. Well, the electricity is the only wild card here, and I don't know what the weighting is on the CPI, but yeah, fundamentally, the U.S. has a huge advantage given its natural gas bounty. People who are worried about running out of natural gas just, well, what can I say? Everybody we talk to in industry tells us how much we're drowning in it, and they're not even trying to find it. It's a nuisance to get at the oil. If that were to flip, it's a total game changer.
Yeah, it is interesting to note that oil on a multi-year basis in real adjusted terms has not actually gone up in price.
The inflation-adjusted price of oil using Bloomberg's, I think, $1983 is $18 a barrel. I mean, if you have to buy a commodity, own gold.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Doomberg. Tell us where we can find your work and stay up to date with your writings.
Yeah, Doomberg.com for our writings, and then, of course, classicsreadaloud.substack.com for our new literature project, which has been going amazingly well. Thanks in no small part to the boost we got last time I was on the show.
Okay.
And thank you for subscribing, and I know you're a big fan of it. So yeah, Doomberg and Classics Read Aloud are our two main projects from the team today. David, always a pleasure. Amazing to watch how much you've grown, and it's always fun to be on your show.
Well, it's always fun to host you, and thank you for supporting the program and coming back. Classics, yeah. I mean, what new literature are you examining? I'm curious to see. I'm curious to always understand why people do the things that they do, and it has nothing to do with your main job. So it's interesting. Yeah,
I'll give you a minute on it. Yeah, so the mission of Classics Read Aloud is to resuscitate and breathe new life into the real classics, especially short stories that most people would never have read or don't know exist. So these are in the public domain, typically 100 years or older, and we want to build a repertoire of really well-produced, well-read, high-quality renditions of these short stories. The motto of Classics Read Aloud is you're never too young or too old to enjoy being read to. It's been pretty popular. Starting a project from zero again is always challenging and daunting and scary and fun. And we've got Doomberg down to a science, I'd say. We research, write, publish, edit, and defend a piece every 4 days. And the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Doomberg has this particular passion, and it's one that we as a team decided to support and launch a new franchise. So Classics Read Aloud, I think there's 14 hours of literature already posted. We only started it September 1st. It's produced in the Doomberg quality on brand, and I think if you're into literature, you'll really enjoy it.
I can't wait for some large language model to write its own novel and have you critique it in a few years.
Well, the difference is these are curated with a nice essay and some thoughtful, etc. afterthoughts. AI will never be able to displace this product, which is one of the reasons we're doing it.
Okay, good. Thank you for enshrining the human touch in the fabric of literature. So please keep doing that.
Absolutely.
And yes, do subscribe to Doomberg Substack. Great source of news for everybody. Thank you for coming back on the show, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.